Most people think fate arrives with a warning. For Charlotte Hayes, it arrived with the soft ding of an elevator. She did not know it then. Standing in the lobby of the Hawthorne Financial Center at 9:47 on a rainy Thursday night, Charlotte thought the worst part of her evening was going to be another hour of overtime. The storm outside had turned Manhattan into a watercolor painting of blurred headlights and silver reflections. Rain slid down the glass walls of the building in long trembling lines. Her feet ached, her shoulders ached. Even the coffee she had finished earlier seemed to have abandoned her. At 26 years old, Charlotte worked as an administrative coordinator for a commercial real estate company, and her biggest dream at that moment was getting home, microwaving leftover pasta, and falling asleep in front of a reality show she would probably never finish. The lobby was almost empty. A security guard sat behind the reception desk, watching something on his phone. A janitor pushed a cart across the polished marble floor. Somewhere overhead, air vents hummed softly. The entire building felt half asleep. Charlotte stepped out of the restroom, adjusted the strap of her tote bag, and checked her phone. One missed text from her best friend, Olivia. Another from her mother reminding her not to drive in the storm. Nothing urgent, nothing unusual. Just another ordinary night. The elevator bank stood at the far end of the lobby, 6 chrome doors reflecting the overhead lights. She pressed the button and waited. Her reflection stared back from the polished metal. Blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Green eyes dulled by a 10-hour workday. A navy blazer she could not wait to take off. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. The doors slid open, empty. Charlotte stepped inside and pressed the button for the parking garage level. The doors closed. The elevator began descending, then stopped. She frowned. They had not reached the garage yet. The display above the door flashed. Floor 37. That made no sense. Nobody from her office worked on the 37th floor. Before she could think about it, the doors opened. Charlotte looked up. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, quiet, empty. She reached for the close button. Then she heard voices, male voices, low and serious. The sound drifted from somewhere down the corridor. Normally she would have ignored it. Normally she would have pressed the button and gone home, but something about those voices made her pause. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was fate. Whatever the reason, Charlotte stepped out. The hallway stretched ahead beneath recessed lights. Thick grey carpet softened every footstep. At the far end, a conference room door stood slightly open. Light spilled into the corridor. The voices came from inside. She took a few cautious steps forward. Not because she expected anything unusual. She simply wanted to know why a floor that should have been empty suddenly sounded occupied. The closer she got, the more distinct the voices became, calm, controlled, professional. Yet there was an intensity beneath them that raised goosebumps along her arms. Charlotte stopped several feet from the door. Through the narrow opening, she could see silhouettes around a long conference table. Men in dark suits, maybe 6 or 7 of them. Their faces were hidden by shadows and angles. One stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Another sat at the head of the table. Nobody laughed, nobody smiled. The atmosphere felt heavy, important. Like Charlotte had accidentally wandered into a conversation carrying more weight than she could understand. Her pulse quickened. She should leave immediately. But then one of the men shifted in his chair. Light crossed part of his face, sharp features, dark hair, calm posture. Something about him commanded attention even from across the room. Everyone else seemed to orient around him naturally, as though the entire room revolved around his presence. Charlotte did not know his name, not yet. She only knew that every instinct suddenly told her she should not be there. She took a step backward. Her shoe brushed lightly against a decorative metal planter positioned along the hallway wall. The sound was tiny, barely noticeable, a soft scrape. Yet the conversation inside stopped instantly. Silence rushed into the corridor. Charlotte's stomach dropped. She froze. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Then a chair slid back, slow, deliberate. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Leave. Move. She stood there, staring at the doorway. Footsteps approached from inside the room. Calm footsteps, unhurried footsteps, the kind that somehow felt more intimidating than running. Charlotte backed away again. Then another voice spoke. Quiet, deep, controlled. She could not make out the words, only the tone, the authority in it. The hallway suddenly felt much longer than before. Her throat tightened. She turned and started walking toward the elevators. Not running. Running would attract attention. Walking. Just keep walking. The elevator doors were still open where she had left them. Thank God. Charlotte stepped inside and immediately pressed the close button. Once, Twice, 3 times. The doors began sliding shut. Relief washed through her. She was leaving, going home, forgetting whatever had happened on the 37th floor. Then a hand appeared between the narrowing doors. The sensors reacted instantly. The doors stopped, slowly reopened. Charlotte's breath caught. A tall man stepped into the elevator. Dark suit, dark hair, calm eyes. Rain and city lights reflected faintly across the polished walls behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The elevator suddenly felt much smaller than before. He looked at Charlotte, not angry, not surprised, just focused, like he was studying a puzzle. Then his gaze drifted briefly toward the conference room down the hallway before returning to her. The doors remained open. The storm continued somewhere beyond the glass walls of Manhattan, and for the first time all night, Charlotte had the unmistakable feeling that her ordinary life had just ended. The elevator doors slid shut behind him with a soft whisper, sealing Charlotte and the stranger inside a box of polished steel and reflected light. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The hum of the elevator machinery suddenly seemed louder than the storm outside. Charlotte became painfully aware of everything, the rainwater still clinging to the hem of her pants, the strap of her tote bag digging into her shoulder. The panic rhythm of her heartbeat. The man standing 6 feet away looked exactly like the figure she had glimpsed at the head of that conference table. Up close, he appeared even more composed. Dark hair, clean-shaven jaw. A charcoal suit tailored with the kind of precision that suggested wealth without announcing it. He was probably in his early 30s. The strange thing was not that he looked intimidating, it was that he looked calm, completely calm. As though nothing unexpected had happened that night, as though finding a stranger outside a private meeting was merely a minor inconvenience. The elevator remained motionless. Charlotte glanced toward the illuminated floor display above the door. 37. They were still on the 37th floor. Why was the elevator not moving? She swallowed hard. "I am sorry," she blurted out before she could stop herself. The words came out too quickly, too nervously. "I took the wrong elevator. I was trying to get to the parking garage." His eyes remained on her, not warm, just attentive. "I see." His voice was lower than she expected, smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that made people listen. Charlotte nodded more times than necessary. "I was not trying to overhear anything, honestly." A faint expression crossed his face, not quite amusement, not quite skepticism. "You seem eager to explain yourself." Heat rushed into her cheeks. "Great," now she sounded guilty. "Because I know how this looks." "And how does it look?" Charlotte opened her mouth and then closed it again. "Good question. How did it look?" A woman wandering outside a private meeting on a floor she had no reason to visit. The answer was obvious. He slipped one hand into his pocket and tilted his head slightly. "You work in this building? 42nd floor. Which company?" "Parker and Reed Commercial Properties." His gaze remained steady. "How long?" 3 years. Charlotte had no idea why it felt like a job interview or why she kept answering every question automatically. Something about him made silence feel impossible. The elevator finally jolted softly beneath their feet. The display changed. 36. They were moving. Relief flooded through her. Good, wonderful. They would reach the lobby. He would leave. She would leave. This bizarre encounter would become an awkward story she told Olivia over brunch. Problem solved. Except the elevator did not continue downward. It stopped again almost immediately. 36. The soft hum vanished. Silence returned. Charlotte's stomach tightened. She looked up at the display, then at the doors, then back at the display. "That is strange." He followed her glance. "Is it?" Elevators usually keep moving. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, usually. Charlotte could not tell whether he was joking. A second later, a quiet tone sounded from somewhere above them. Then another, almost like a notification. The man reached into his jacket and removed a phone. He glanced at the screen briefly before returning it to his pocket. Whatever message he received did not seem to surprise him. That realization made Charlotte even more uneasy. "Do you know why it stopped?" she asked. Possibly, not exactly reassuring. Rain rattled faintly against the building's distant glass exterior. Outside, Manhattan glowed through the storm, thousands of lights stretching into the darkness. Inside the elevator, the air felt strangely still. Charlotte folded her arms, unfolded them, except directly at him. Then curiosity got the better of her. "Can I ask you something? You just did." There it was again, that almost smile, tiny, gone in an instant. To her own surprise, Charlotte found herself smiling back despite her nerves. "What was that meeting?" His expression immediately became unreadable. "A meeting, that is not really an answer. It was not intended to be." "Fair enough." Charlotte looked away. The polished steel wall reflected both of them in distorted shapes. He stood perfectly relaxed while she looked like someone trying very hard not to panic. "You think I heard something important?" The statement escaped before she could stop it. His gaze shifted toward her again. "Did you?" No. She had not heard enough to understand anything. Just voices, fragments, shadows. He studied her for several seconds, long enough to make Charlotte wonder what exactly he was looking for. Finally, he nodded. "Believe you." The answer surprised her. "You do?" "Yes. That seems fast. People reveal more than they realize when they are frightened." Charlotte blinked. "Am I that obvious?" "A little." She groaned quietly. "Wonderful." Somewhere above them, another mechanical sound echoed through the shaft. The elevator remained stationary. Then a soft click came from the control panel. Several buttons illuminated simultaneously. Charlotte's pulse quickened again. Something was happening. The man noticed her expression. "Relax. That is easy for you to say. Why? Because you look like nothing ever surprises you." For the first time, a genuine smile appeared, brief, unexpected, transforming his entire face. "That is not true, Charlotte Hayes." Every muscle in her body froze. Her name. She had never told him her name. The smile disappeared. The elevator suddenly felt much smaller than before, and as the doors remained firmly closed, only one question echoed through Charlotte's mind. How did he know exactly who she was? For a second, Charlotte forgot how to breathe. The elevator seemed to shrink around her. The lights overhead hummed softly. Rain tapped against distant windows somewhere beyond the concrete and steel of the building. But all she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. The question came out quieter than she intended. Vincent Marino did not answer immediately. His expression remained calm, patient, as though he had expected the reaction. "You work in this building," he said. It is not difficult to find information that should have reassured her. Somehow it did not. Most people do not memorize the names of strangers they meet in elevators. Most people are not standing outside private meetings after business hours. Charlotte opened her mouth and closed it again. Unfortunately, the silence stretched between them. She stared at him. He stared back. Neither of them looked away first. Then another soft click sounded from the control panel. Charlotte glanced toward it automatically. A small red indicator light had appeared near the emergency access panel. Her stomach tightened. "What is that?" Vincent followed her gaze. "A security protocol." "What kind of security protocol?" "The building has several." That was not an answer. He knew it. She knew it. Yet he remained completely unbothered. "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Answering questions without actually answering them." To Charlotte's surprise, he laughed quietly. The sound lasted less than a second, but it changed something. For the first time since stepping into the elevator, he seemed less like a figure carved from marble and more like an actual person. Dangerous? Maybe. Mysterious? Definitely. But human. "I imagine honesty is complicated in your line of work," she said before thinking. One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. "And what line of work do you think I am in?" Good question. An intelligent person would have changed the subject immediately. Unfortunately, curiosity had always been Charlotte's worst quality. "Something important, powerful. You had 6 men listening to you in a private conference room on a floor nobody uses. That is an observation. It is also a clue." Another faint smile appeared. "You watch too many crime documentaries." Charlotte folded her arms. "That is not a denial." Before he could answer, the elevator suddenly moved again. The motion startled her. The floor indicator changed. 35, 34, 33, finally. They were moving. Relief washed through her. She had never been so happy to see descending numbers in her life. Vincent seemed to notice. "You are eager to leave. Would that surprise you?" "A little. Why?" His gaze remained steady. "Most people become more curious before they become less curious." Charlotte hated that he was right. Because despite every warning bell in her head, despite the strange meeting, despite the fact that he somehow knew her name, part of her wanted answers. That realization alone should have worried her. The elevator descended another 3 floors before stopping again. 29. Her relief vanished instantly. "Seriously?" she muttered. The doors remained closed. The elevator remained still. "This building has the worst elevators in Manhattan." Vincent glanced at his watch. "Actually, they are considered among the most reliable." "Then why do they keep stopping?" His eyes met hers. "Because someone wants them to." The words settled heavily in the air. Charlotte stared at him. "Someone?" He nodded. "Who?" Another silence followed. Then he checked the screen briefly. Whatever he read seemed expected. He slipped the phone away. Vincent. It was the first time Charlotte had spoken his name, the first time it felt real. His attention returned immediately. Yes, The question escaped before she could stop it. His expression changed almost imperceptibly, not guilt, not surprise, recognition, as though she had finally arrived at the correct conclusion. Charlotte's pulse quickened. Vincent, his voice remained calm. Yes, several seconds passed, then he answered. For the moment. Every nerve in her body tightened. For the moment? Charlotte. Do not Charlotte me. Another almost smile appeared. That ship sailed about 10 minutes ago. The smile grew slightly wider before disappearing. The elevator remained silent, motionless. The red security light continued glowing above the panel. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the city. Charlotte suddenly understood something important. Vincent Marino was not trapped in that elevator with her. He had never been trapped at all. He knew exactly why they had stopped. Exactly who was controlling the system, exactly what was happening, and somehow, for reasons she could not begin to understand, she was now part of it. Then the speaker above their heads crackled softly to life. A voice came through the intercom. Calm, professional. Mr. Marino, everything is secure. Charlotte's stomach dropped. Vincent never looked away from her. The speaker went silent. Charlotte stared at him. He stared back, and in that moment she realized the elevator doors had not malfunctioned. They had been locked on purpose. Charlotte's first instinct was to laugh, not because anything was funny, because sometimes the human brain reached for the wrong emotion when it ran out of the right ones. The sound never made it past her throat. She simply stared at Vincent Marino while reality settled around her piece by piece. The locked doors, the private meeting, the security confirmation through the intercom. None of it had been accidental, none of it had been random. Somewhere above them, rain continued sweeping across Manhattan. Somewhere below them, people were probably finishing late dinners, catching trains, heading home to families, television, and ordinary lives. Meanwhile, Charlotte was standing inside a secured elevator with a man who apparently had enough influence to stop an entire building whenever he wanted. "Okay," she said carefully. "Let me make sure I understand this." Vincent remained silent. "The doors are locked, temporarily, because you ordered them locked, yes." Charlotte nodded slowly. "And I am supposed to be comfortable with that?" "No." The honesty caught her off guard. For the first time all evening, he sounded completely sincere. "I do not expect you to be comfortable." Another faint smile appeared. Charlotte was beginning to suspect smiling was not something he did often. "Charlotte, what? You are safe." She almost laughed again. People usually do not have to say that when someone feels safe. The smile disappeared. "Fair point." Silence settled between them. The elevator lights reflected softly against the steel walls. Charlotte's pulse was still elevated, but the initial panic had started giving way to frustration. Fear burned hot. Frustration lasted longer. "What exactly do you think I heard?" she asked. Vincent studied her for a moment. "I do not know. That is reassuring. It is the truth. Then why am I here?" He considered the question. "Because I need to know whether someone else believes you heard something important." Charlotte frowned. "Someone else?" He nodded once. "You were not the only person on that floor tonight." She replayed the hallway in her mind. The conference room, the shadows, the voices, the feeling that someone had noticed her before she ever touched the planter. A chill ran down her spine. "You think somebody saw me? I know somebody saw you. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful." Her ordinary Thursday night was improving by the minute. Charlotte paced 2 steps across the elevator and stopped. There was not exactly a lot of room for dramatic movement. "Let me get this straight. I accidentally end up on the wrong floor. Somebody sees me. And now I am stuck in an elevator because people might think I know something I do not know. Essentially, that is the worst explanation I have ever heard." "I agree." Charlotte stared at him. He stared back. Then, to her complete surprise, both of them smiled for about half a second. The moment vanished almost immediately, yet it changed something. The tension loosened slightly, not gone, just less sharp. Vincent moved toward the control panel. Every movement seemed deliberate, measured, nothing rushed. Nothing wasted. He pressed a small security button and waited. A soft tone answered. "How long?" he asked. A voice replied through the speaker. "5 more minutes, sir." "Sir." The word echoed in Charlotte's mind. 5 more minutes. She folded her arms. "You know, most people just exchange business cards. Most situations do not require elevators. You have a response for everything, not everything." For a second his expression shifted, just slightly. Something thoughtful passed behind his eyes. Then it was gone. Charlotte suddenly became aware of how tired she was. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion behind. Her shoulders sagged. The long workday, the rain, the confusion, everything hit her at once. Vincent noticed immediately. Nothing seemed to escape his attention. You have not eaten dinner. It was not. How do you know that? You checked your phone 6 times before we left the 37th floor. Charlotte blinked. You counted? You were reading food delivery notifications. That was embarrassingly accurate. That is unsettling. Observation is useful. The corner of his mouth lifted again, then his phone vibrated. This time when he checked the screen, something changed. Not alarm, not concern, focus, sharp and immediate. The atmosphere inside the elevator shifted with him. Charlotte felt it instantly. What happened? She asked. Vincent looked up. For the first time that evening, he seemed to weigh how much truth to give her. Finally, he slipped the phone away. The situation has changed. Charlotte's stomach tightened. What situation? Another brief silence followed. Then he answered. The person who noticed you on that floor has already started asking questions about who you are. Every trace of humor disappeared from Charlotte's face. The elevator suddenly felt small again, very small, and when Vincent spoke next, his voice was quieter than before. That is why I cannot simply let you walk out of this building alone tonight. For several seconds, Charlotte simply stared at him. The words refused to settle into something reasonable. They bounced around her exhausted mind, looking for logic and finding none. You cannot be serious. Vincent did not look away. I am. You are telling me that somebody I have never met is suddenly interested in me because I accidentally stepped onto the wrong floor. Yes, that sounds insane, it does, and yet you believe it. I know it. The certainty in his voice made Charlotte's stomach tighten. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him he was overreacting. She wanted to point out that Manhattan contained more than 8 million people, and nobody had time to focus on a random office worker who spent her evenings processing lease agreements and correcting spreadsheet errors. Unfortunately, the look in his eyes made those arguments feel weak before she even spoke them. Vincent was not guessing, he was not theorizing, he was responding to information he already had. The elevator finally moved again. 28, 27, 26. The numbers descended steadily now, yet Charlotte felt strangely trapped. What happens if I leave? She asked quietly. Leave? Walk out of this building, drive home, pretend tonight never happened. Vincent studied her for a moment. Then I spend the rest of the night making sure nobody follows you. That sounds dramatic. It is practical. The answer arrived so quickly that it unsettled her even more. Charlotte rubbed her forehead. A headache was beginning to form behind her eyes. I have work tomorrow. I have meetings, I know. I have a life, I know. You keep saying that like it solves something. A faint smile appeared. It does not. Another silence followed. The elevator continued downward. 23, 22, 21. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the city. Charlotte suddenly became aware of how tired Vincent looked beneath all that composure. Not physically tired, something deeper, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying responsibility for too long. It appeared only briefly when he thought she was not looking. Then it vanished again behind the calm mask he wore so naturally. Why are you helping me? She asked. The question slipped out before she could stop it. Vincent looked genuinely surprised. Helping you? Yes. Because this situation involves me, that is not the same thing. His gaze shifted toward the descending floor numbers. Maybe not. The answer felt incomplete, like every answer he gave. Half truth, half mystery. The elevator reached the 15th floor before stopping one final time. The doors remained closed. A soft tone sounded overhead. Then the speaker activated. Everything is clear, sir. Vincent nodded slightly. Thank you. The line disconnected. A moment later, the elevator resumed its descent. Charlotte's pulse quickened. Whatever happened next was happening now. The lobby appeared sooner than she expected. The display reached one. The doors slid open. Warm light spilled inside. The familiar marble lobby stretched beyond the threshold exactly as it had an hour earlier. The security guard still sat at his desk. The janitor still pushed his cart. Everything looked normal. That was somehow the strangest part. Charlotte's entire evening had changed. The world had not noticed. Vincent stepped out first. She hesitated before following. The lobby suddenly felt enormous after the confined space of the elevator. Charlotte adjusted her bag and glanced toward the revolving doors leading outside. Rain still poured across the city. Headlights reflected across wet pavement. Home was only 20 minutes away. 20 minutes. Yet it felt impossibly distant. Vincent's phone vibrated again. He read the screen. His expression hardened slightly. Not anger. Decision. Charlotte. She looked up. What? I would like you to come somewhere safe tonight. There it was. The proposal she had been expecting ever since the elevator stopped. Charlotte folded her arms immediately. No, you answered very quickly because that sounds like a terrible idea. Understandable. I do not even know you. Also understandable. Normal people do not accept invitations from mysterious strangers after being trapped in elevators. That is a reasonable policy. Charlotte frowned. You are making it difficult to argue with you. I have been told that before. Despite herself, she laughed. The first real laugh of the evening. Vincent looked almost relieved to hear it. Then his expression became serious again. Charlotte, what? I am not asking because I want to control where you go. The words were calm, direct, honest. I am asking because if someone is trying to identify you tonight, I would rather they fail. Rain hammered against the glass entrance. A taxi passed outside. Somewhere across the lobby, a phone rang briefly. Ordinary sounds, ordinary moments. Yet standing there beneath the soft lights, Charlotte realized something important. Her choices had changed. An hour earlier, the question had been whether she wanted to get home before midnight. Now the question was whether she believed Vincent Marino. Every instinct told her he was telling the truth. Then he reached it into his jacket pocket, removed a business card and handed it to her. The card was simple, white, elegant. No company logo, no title, just a name. Vincent Marino, and beneath it a single phone number. You can leave right now if you want, he said quietly. The choice is yours. Charlotte looked down at the card in her hand, then back at the storm outside, then back at him, and for the first time that night, she realized the decision she made in the next 30 seconds might change everything. The business card felt heavier than paper should have. Charlotte stood there staring at the simple black lettering, while rain streamed down the glass walls behind Vincent. Her mind kept presenting two versions of reality. In one version, this was absurd. A stranger with too much information and too much influence was asking her to trust him after the strangest night of her life. In the other version, every instinct she possessed quietly warned her that walking away might be the bigger mistake. She looked toward the revolving doors again. Home, her apartment in Brooklyn, her worn grey couch, a refrigerator full of leftovers and expired yogurt, her predictable life. Then Charlotte looked back at Vincent Marino. Nothing about him felt predictably. His expression remained calm, but Charlotte caught the briefest sign of relief in his eyes. One night, he agreed, and tomorrow I go home, if everything is resolved. Charlotte immediately pointed a finger at him. That is not a yes. A faint smile appeared. Tomorrow you can make your own decision. It was not exactly reassuring, but it was close enough. 10 minutes later, Charlotte found herself sitting in the back seat of a black SUV moving through rain-soaked Manhattan streets. The city glowed outside the windows. Neon signs reflected across wet pavement. Yellow taxis drifted through the storm like floating lanterns. Vincent sat across from her in the facing seat configuration. Neither of them spoke much during the drive. Charlotte was too busy trying to process the fact that she had willingly climbed into a vehicle with a man she had met less than 2 hours earlier. Every life decision seminar she had ever attended would have been horrified. The vehicle eventually left Midtown and headed north. Traffic thinned. Buildings became larger, more private, more expensive. 15 minutes later, they turned through a wrought iron gate that opened automatically. Charlotte's eyes widened. You live here? The estate stretched across an entire city block, not exactly a mansion, something more modern. Glass, stone, clean architectural lines. Elegant rather than flashy. Warm lights glowed through enormous windows. Vincent followed her gaze. Yes, this is not a house. What would you call it? A small country. That earned another rare smile. The SUV stopped beneath a covered entrance. A man in a dark suit opened Charlotte's door before she could reach for the handle. Miss Hayes. She blinked. How does everybody know my name? The man looked mildly uncomfortable. Good evening, Miss Hayes. Not an answer. Definitely not an answer. Inside, Charlotte had expected cold luxury. Marble everywhere, gold fixtures, the sort of place designed to impress strangers. Instead, it felt lived in, comfortable, shelves filled with books, framed photographs. Fresh flowers arranged throughout the main rooms. A fireplace crackled softly in the distance. The atmosphere felt less like a fortress and more like a home. That realization unsettled Charlotte in an entirely different way. Vincent removed his suit jacket and handed it to us. Appointed. I am not disappointed. You expected something else. Charlotte hesitated. Maybe. Such as something more intimidating. He nodded as though he heard that often. That is usually the reputation. They walked through a long hallway overlooking a private garden. Rain tapped gently against the glass ceiling above. The entire place felt impossibly quiet after the noise of Manhattan. A woman in her 60s appeared from a nearby doorway, silver hair, warm eyes, kind smile. She immediately looked relieved when she saw Vincent. "You are late, I know." Her attention shifted toward Charlotte. "And who is this?" Before Vincent could answer, Charlotte stepped forward. "Charlotte Hayes." The woman's smile widened. "Welcome, Charlotte." The warmth in her voice caught Charlotte off guard. She extended her hand. "I am Rosa." Not an employee introduction, not formal, just Rosa. Somehow that made Charlotte relax slightly. "It is nice to meet you. You must be hungry." Charlotte laughed despite herself. "Apparently everyone knows that." Rosa glanced toward Vincent knowingly. "He notices everything." Vincent sighed quietly. "This conversation feels unfair." For the first time all night, the atmosphere felt normal. Briefly, comfortably normal. Rosa guided Charlotte toward a dining room overlooking the garden. Fresh soup waited on the table beside warm bread and tea. The smell alone made Charlotte realize how hungry she actually was. "You prepared this?" she asked. Rosa looked offended. "Of course." Charlotte sat down slowly. The entire situation still felt surreal. Yet somehow, surrounded by warm lighting and the scent of fresh food, the fear that had followed her since the 37th floor began to loosen its grip. Vincent remained standing near the window, looking outside, thinking, always thinking. Charlotte watched him for a moment. Then she noticed something resting on a nearby table. Hospital reports, charity proposals, community outreach budgets. Her eyes narrowed. Vincent followed her gaze. Neither of them spoke. But for the first time, a small crack appeared in the image Charlotte had built of him, and she suddenly began to wonder whether the man everyone feared might not be the man she was actually meeting. Charlotte should have gone to bed. Any reasonable person would have. The guest suite Rosa had shown her was larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the rain-soaked gardens. Soft lamps cast golden light across polished hardwood floors. Fresh towels waited in the bathroom. A tray with tea and bottled water sat beside the bed. Everything about the room was designed for comfort, yet sleep refused to come. Her mind kept replaying the evening, the wrong elevator, the private meeting, the locked doors, Vincent somehow knowing her name. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. Around midnight, Charlotte gave up trying to sleep. She pulled on a cardigan and stepped quietly into the hallway. The house remained peaceful. Most of the lights had been dimmed. Somewhere in the distance, a grandfather clock marked the passing hour. Rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling overhead. She wandered without any particular destination. Mostly she wanted to clear her head. The estate felt different at night, more personal, less intimidating. Framed photographs lined portions of the hallway, landscapes, family gatherings, charity events, not the collection Charlotte expected from a man whose name seemed capable of stopping elevators and mobilizing security teams. Eventually, she reached a smaller sitting room overlooking the garden. A single lamp glowed beside a leather chair. Someone was there, Vincent. He sat alone near the window. A file rested open in his lap, reading glasses balanced low on his nose. The sight was so unexpectedly normal that Charlotte almost laughed. This was not the image her imagination had created. He looked up immediately. Of course he did. Nothing seemed to escape Vincent Marino's attention. "You should be sleeping," he said. His eyes drifted toward the folder. "Fair." Charlotte stepped farther into the room. "What are you reading?" "Grant applications." She blinked. "Grant applications? Yes, that sounds incredibly boring." "Most worthwhile things involve paperwork." The answer caught her off guard. Then she noticed the documents spread across the table beside him. Children's hospitals, scholarship programs, community centers, medical outreach projects. Her confusion must have shown because Vincent leaned back slightly. "A few hundred. That many? Possibly more." To Charlotte's surprise, he gestured toward the chair across from him. She hesitated before sitting. Rain streaked down the glass behind them. Garden lights reflected softly across the wet stone pathways outside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Charlotte pointed toward one of the folders. "You fund these?" Vincent nodded. "Some of them. Why?" He looked genuinely puzzled. "Why would I not? Because most people with your level of influence spend their money on yachts. I do not own a yacht. That is not the point." A faint smile appeared. "I know." He glanced toward the documents. "A scholarship paid for education." That answer surprised Charlotte enough that she forgot her next question. Vincent noticed immediately. "You assumed I was born wealthy. Was I wrong? Very." The rain seemed louder suddenly. Not because it had intensified, because Charlotte was paying closer attention. Listening, Vincent's gaze remained fixed on the window. My mother worked 2 jobs. My grandfather drove a delivery truck. There were years when paying rent felt impossible. Charlotte stared at him. Nothing about the man in front of her suggested struggle, yet the way he spoke carried the weight of memory rather than performance. What changed? She asked quietly. Opportunity. The answer arrived immediately. No hesitation, no dramatic speech, just one word. Opportunity. Charlotte found herself wondering how many times he had replayed that answer in his own mind over the years. So now you create opportunities for other people. Vincent looked at her, something like that. Another silence settled between them. Unexpectedly comfortable, Charlotte studied him across the small table. The sharp suit was gone. The formal posture had softened. For the first time since meeting him, he looked his age. Maybe 32, maybe 33. Not a powerful figure surrounded by secrets, just a man carrying responsibilities nobody else could see. Then his phone vibrated. The atmosphere changed instantly, not dramatically, just enough for Charlotte to notice. Vincent checked the screen. The warmth faded from his expression. Focus returned. Calculation. Bad news? Charlotte asked. He slipped the phone into his pocket. Nothing you need to worry about. That is usually code for something I should definitely worry about. The corner of his mouth twitched. Then he stood, walked toward the window and looked out across the rain-covered gardens. For several seconds he said nothing. Finally he spoke. Charlotte, yes. When you leave this house tomorrow, there are certain places you normally go. Charlotte's stomach tightened immediately. My apartment, yes. My office, yes. The coffee shop across from my building. Vincent nodded. Charlotte stared at him. You really did research me, only after tonight. That is somehow not comforting. A brief smile appeared before vanishing again. Then his expression became serious. The coffee shop received 2 inquiries about you this evening. Every trace of humor disappeared from Charlotte's face. The room suddenly felt colder. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across Manhattan, and for the first time since arriving at the estate, Charlotte realized the problem Vincent had been trying to explain was not getting smaller. It was getting closer. The words settled heavily between them. 2 inquiries about Charlotte. At a coffee shop she visited almost every morning. The idea seemed absurd until she remembered everything else that had happened during the past few hours. The wrong floor, the private meeting, the locked elevator. None of that had seemed believable either. Yet here she was. Charlotte stared at Vincent across the sitting room while rain traced silver lines down the glass behind him. Who asked about me? She finally managed. Vincent shook his head slightly. That is the problem, you do not know? Not yet. Charlotte stood from the chair and crossed her arms. Suddenly, sitting still felt impossible. Then how do you know someone was asking? Because the owner called one of my associates. She blinked. Your associates seem to know everyone. In this city, relationships matter. The answer was frustratingly vague. Then again, nearly every answer Vincent gave seemed wrapped in mystery. Charlotte paced toward the window. The gardens beyond glowed softly beneath hidden landscape lights. Rain collected on stone pathways and reflected the warm light from the house. Everything looked peaceful, safe, yet for the first time in her life, safety felt temporary. I do not understand why anyone would care about me. Vincent remained quiet for several seconds. Neither do I. That is supposed to make me feel better? No. At least he was honest. Charlotte rubbed her temples. Exhaustion pulled at every muscle in her body. Her entire life had shifted in less than one evening. Yesterday, her biggest concern had been whether her manager would approve next month's vacation request. Tonight, she was discussing security concerns with a man who somehow knew every detail of her routine. Tell me something honestly. Vincent looked up. All right, what happened at that meeting? The question had been sitting inside Charlotte for hours. He knew it. She knew it. Rain continued tapping softly against the glass. Somewhere in the house, Vincent exhaled slowly before answering. Several business interests were represented. Charlotte immediately frowned. That sounds like a lawyer wrote it. A faint smile appeared. Perhaps. Vincent, Charlotte, do not do that. For the first time all evening, he laughed openly. The sound surprised both of them. It transformed him, not dramatically. Just enough to remind Charlotte there was a real person beneath the carefully controlled exterior. Then the smile faded. Some people at that meeting believe information is power. His gaze shifted toward the rain. They become concerned when they think information has left the room. Charlotte understood immediately, even if it did not, especially if they cannot prove otherwise. A chill moved through her. Suddenly the situation felt less personal and more dangerous in a way she could not fully define, not because anyone had threatened her, because uncertainty itself had become the problem. Vincent's phone vibrated again. He checked the screen. This time his expression did not change. If anything, he seemed relieved. "Good news?" Charlotte asked. "Possibly." He typed a quick response before placing the phone aside. "One of my people reviewed security footage." Charlotte's pulse quickened. "And?" "You never entered the conference room." "Of course I did not enter the conference room. I know that. The footage confirms it." Hope flickered inside her. "Then this whole thing can be explained." Vincent remained silent. Charlotte's hope immediately faded. "What?" He leaned back slightly. "Rational explanations only work when everyone involved wants a rational explanation." That was not reassuring, not even a little. Another silence settled over the room. Then Charlotte noticed something unusual. Vincent looked tired. Not physically tired, emotionally tired, as though carrying responsibilities nobody else could see. The realization softened something inside her. "When was the last time you slept?" she asked. One eyebrow lifted. "That is your question? Answer it." "A few hours ago." "That is not what I asked." For a moment he almost looked embarrassed. "I do not know. That is not healthy. I have heard that before. From Rosa? Mostly from Rosa." Charlotte smiled despite everything. The image felt oddly comforting. Somewhere beneath the layers of mystery influence, there existed a version of Vincent Marino who got lectured about sleep by a woman who made soup. That version felt real, human. Then another message appeared on his phone. He read it. This time, every trace of warmth disappeared from his expression. Charlotte's stomach tightened immediately. "What happened?" Vincent looked directly at her. The room suddenly felt very still. Rain tapped against the glass. The fire crackled softly in the distance. "Someone accessed your employee file tonight." Charlotte's breath caught. "What? From inside your office building?" Every nerve in her body went rigid. Vincent rose slowly from his chair. His voice remained calm, controlled. But for the first time since meeting him, Charlotte heard genuine concern beneath the words. "Charlotte," he said quietly, "I do not think this is an accident anymore." For a moment, Charlotte could only stare at him. The words echoed inside her head. Someone had accessed her employee file, not searched her social media, not asked questions at a coffee shop. The difference felt enormous, personal, deliberate. The rain outside seemed louder now. Every drop striking the glass sounded like a countdown she could not understand. "Who would have access to that?" she asked quietly. Vincent remained standing near the fireplace. "Anyone with the right credentials. That narrows it down to about 1,000 people." "Not necessarily." He picked up his phone again and read another message. "The access occurred after normal business hours." Charlotte's stomach tightened. So someone stayed late or someone returned. Neither possibility made her feel better. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around herself. The warmth of the house suddenly felt far away. Her ordinary life was becoming unrecognizable. Every familiar place now seemed connected to questions she could not answer. Her office, her apartment, her favorite coffee shop. Someone had started pulling threads, and somehow those threads all led back to "I want to go home." The words escaped before she could stop them. Vincent looked at her, not surprised, not dismissive, just understanding. "I know. I want my life back. I know. I did not ask for any of this." His expression softened slightly. "I know that too." The sincerity in his voice almost made things worse. If he had been cold, arrogant, impossible, Charlotte could have blamed him. Instead, he looked like a man carrying responsibility he never wanted her to inherit. Silence stretched between them. Finally he spoke. "Come with me." Charlotte frowned. "Where?" "There is something I want to show you." Under normal circumstances, those words would have triggered every warning signal imaginable. Yet nothing about that night qualified as normal. A few minutes later, they were walking through another section of the estate. The hallway curved toward a newer wing overlooking the gardens. Soft lights illuminated framed architectural drawings along the walls. Outside, the storm had begun to weaken. Rain still fell, but more gently now. They stopped before a pair of glass doors. Vincent opened them. Charlotte stepped inside and immediately froze. It was not an office, not exactly. More like a planning center. Large tables filled the room, maps covered the walls, scale models of buildings occupied display platforms, community centers, medical clinics, housing developments, scholarship foundations. Charlotte's eyes widened. What is all this? Vincent stepped beside her. projects. Projects, future schools, clinics, housing programs. Charlotte turned slowly. The room stretched farther than she first realized. Every wall displayed plans designed to help people. Real people, families, students, children, entire neighborhoods. You are funding all of this? He shook his head. Not alone, but you are involved. Yes. For several seconds, Charlotte simply stared. This was not the world she expected to find behind locked elevators and private meetings. It did not fit the picture at all. Why keep this hidden? She asked. Vincent looked toward one of the architectural models, because attention tends to follow publicity. Most people would want credit. Most people are different. The answer lingered in the air. Then his phone rang. Not a message this time, a call. The atmosphere changed instantly. Vincent glanced at the screen before answering. Talk to me. His voice became calm, focused, professional. He listened without interruption. As the seconds passed, something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not anger. When the call ended, he lowered the phone slowly. Charlotte's pulse quickened. What happened? For a moment he said nothing. Then he looked directly at her. Your building security team reviewed additional footage. Charlotte's stomach dropped, and someone entered the records office tonight using a temporary access card. She waited. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. The card was issued under a false name. The room suddenly felt colder. Every instinct inside Charlotte screamed that the situation had crossed some invisible line. This was no longer curiosity, no longer coincidence. Someone had gone out of their way to find her. Vincent took a step closer, not threatening, protective, steady. Charlotte. Yes. Tomorrow was supposed to be simple. Her pulse hammered inside her chest. Was supposed to be. His eyes held hers. Now I think we need to find out why someone believes you are important before they decide what to do next. Sleep never came after that. Charlotte returned to the guest suite sometime before dawn, but her mind refused to slow down. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw employee records, access cards, security footage, and unanswered questions. By 6 in the morning, pale sunlight had begun filtering through the clouds outside. The storm was gone. Manhattan glittered in the distance beneath a sky washed clean by rain. Charlotte stood by the window holding a cup of coffee that Rosa had somehow arranged to appear outside her door before she woke. The woman was either incredibly thoughtful or secretly magical, possibly both. Her phone buzzed. Olivia. Charlotte stared at her friend's name for several seconds before Aunt Charlotte. Olivia's voice immediately filled with concern. Where are you? I called 3 times last night. Guilt twisted in Charlotte's stomach. I am okay. That is not an answer. Olivia knew her too well. Charlotte walked. Something happened, clearly. Another pause followed. Are you in trouble? Charlotte glanced across the gardens below. 2 groundskeepers worked near a fountain. Birds moved through the hedges. Everything looked peaceful. I honestly do not know, Olivia sighed. That is a terrible response. I know. Do I need to come get you? The offer warmed Charlotte more than the coffee. No, Charlotte. I promise I am safe. At least she hoped that part was true. After ending the call, Charlotte made her way downstairs. The estate felt brighter during the day. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows. The gardens looked even more impressive now that she could actually see them. Rosa greeted her with breakfast and enough concern to rival her mother. By the time Charlotte finished eating, Vincent finally appeared. He looked composed as always, but something felt different. More focused, more determined. He carried a folder beneath one arm. Good morning, he said. You say that like this is a normal morning. I find optimism useful. Charlotte narrowed her eyes. That was suspiciously cheerful. The corner of his mouth lifted. Come with me. 20 minutes later, they sat inside a private office overlooking the city skyline. The folder rested on the desk between them. Charlotte's name appeared across the tab. Seeing it there made her stomach tighten. Vincent opened it. Inside were copies of records, access logs, security reports, timestamps, information she barely understood. Someone entered your file at 11:12 last night, he said. The same time I was trapped in an elevator, approximately. Hearing him describe it that way made Charlotte frown. You know, most people would call that trapped. Technically, definitely trapped. Another almost smile. Then his attention returned to the documents. The access card used was temporary. You said that already. What I did not tell you is that the card should not have existed. Charlotte's pulse quickened. Meaning, Vincent slid one page toward her. The authorization was generated from inside the building's executive network. Charlotte stared at the report. Most of it looked like another language. Someone with significant access created a credential that bypassed normal security procedures. Charlotte looked up slowly. Someone important? Yes, Silence settled across the room. The realization felt heavier than everything that had come before. This was no longer random curiosity. Somebody with resources had decided she mattered. The question was why. Vincent leaned back in his chair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Charlotte noticed something unusual on the edge of the desk. A photograph, old, slightly faded. It showed a younger Vincent standing beside a woman and a teenage boy near what looked like a community center. Everyone in the picture was smiling, genuine smiles, the kind people could not fake. Vincent noticed her attention immediately. "My mother," he said. Charlotte looked at the photograph again. "And your brother?" A brief shadow crossed his face. "My cousin." The answer was simple, but something about his expression suggested a larger story. Before Charlotte could ask, a knock sounded at the door. One of Vincent's associates entered, tall, professional, serious. The atmosphere changed immediately. "Sir." Vincent stood. "What is it?" The man handed over a tablet. Vincent reviewed the screen. Every trace of warmth disappeared from his expression. Charlotte's stomach dropped. She was beginning to recognize that look. It meant something important had happened. Several seconds passed. Then Vincent lowered the tablet slowly. "Thank you." The associate nodded and left. The office door closed. Silence followed. Charlotte stared at Vincent. What happened now? He looked directly at her. The city skyline shimmered beyond the glass behind him. Cars moved along distant streets, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Meanwhile, Charlotte's world continued shifting beneath her feet. Vincent placed the tablet on the desk between them. On the screen was a security image from her office building. A still photograph captured from a hallway camera. The picture showed a person entering the records department after hours. Their face remained hidden beneath a cap. But something else was visible, something unmistakable. The person was carrying a photograph of Charlotte. For several seconds, Charlotte could not look away from the image. The photograph in the stranger's hand was unmistakably hers. Not a random picture pulled from social media, not a blurry screenshot. It was a printed employee identification photo, the kind stored inside company records, the kind ordinary people never carried around. A cold sensation moved through her chest. "That is my file photo," Vincent nodded. "Yes." "So whoever accessed the records was specifically looking for me. That appears to be the case." The office suddenly felt smaller. The city beyond the windows seemed farther away. Everything that had happened over the past 24 hours clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The questions at the coffee shop, the access card, the employee records, none of it had been random. Somebody had started searching before Charlotte even realized there was a reason to search. "Why?" she whispered. Vincent remained silent, not because he was hiding something, because he genuinely did not know. That realization frightened Charlotte more than any answer could have. If Vincent Marino, a man who seemed capable of uncovering anything, did not know why this was happening, then the situation was bigger than either of them understood. Charlotte sat down slowly. Her legs suddenly felt unreliable. Vincent moved around the desk and placed the tablet aside. "Charlotte!" She looked up. "What?" "There is something I have not told you." Her pulse quickened immediately. That sentence never leads anywhere good. A faint smile appeared and disappeared. "The meeting on the 37th floor was not about money." Charlotte blinked. "Okay, it was about preventing a conflict." She waited. Vincent walked toward the window overlooking Manhattan. Sunlight reflected off distant skyscrapers. Several groups have been competing for influence in different sectors of the city, business influence, among other things. The answer was careful, but Charlotte understood enough, and the meeting was supposed to stop that. Vincent nodded once. That was the goal. Charlotte studied him quietly. "You were trying to prevent something." "Yes." The simplicity of the answer surprised her. No excuses, no performance, just truth. For the first time, Charlotte realized how exhausted he must have been carrying all of this alone. Everyone saw the powerful man. Nobody saw the responsibility behind the power. Nobody saw the sleepless nights or impossible decisions. Nobody saw the projects hidden in that planning room. The scholarships, the clinics, the housing developments, the version of Vincent Marino she had imagined on the 37th floor no longer existed. The real one was infinitely more complicated. A soft knock interrupted the silence. One of his associates stepped inside. "What is it?" "We identified the individual from the security footage." Charlotte's heartbeat immediately accelerated. The associate handed over a folder. Vincent opened it. His eyes moved across the page. For the first time since she met him, genuine surprise crossed his face. Not concern, not calculation, surprise. "What?" Charlotte asked. Vincent looked up slowly, then he handed her the file. Charlotte stared at the photograph attached to the report. A middle-aged man, grey suit, familiar face. Her breath caught instantly. No, the word escaped before she could stop it. Vincent watched her carefully. You know him? Charlotte nodded, her hands trembled slightly. That is Daniel Mercer. Who is Daniel Mercer? Vincent asked. Charlotte swallowed hard. He is the vice president of my company. Silence filled the office. Suddenly everything felt even more impossible. Daniel Mercer had worked in the building for years. He attended charity events, spoke at conferences, sent holiday cards to employees. Nothing about him had ever seemed unusual, yet according to the report, he was the person who had entered the records department after hours carrying Charlotte's photograph. Vincent took the file back. His expression had become unreadable again. Then we finally have a starting point. Charlotte looked out across the city. Somewhere beyond those towers and streets and millions of lives, the answer had been hiding in plain sight all along. The frightening part was not that someone had been looking for her. The frightening part was realizing that someone she already knew had been looking all along. The moment Charlotte saw Daniel Mercer's photograph, the entire situation changed. Fear was one thing, mystery was another. But familiarity carried its own kind of weight. She had passed Daniel in hallways for 3 years. She had attended company meetings where he spoke about growth, leadership, and community values. He remembered employee birthdays, sent congratulatory emails when departments hit targets. Nothing about him had ever felt suspicious, yet there he was, walking into the records office after hours carrying her photograph. Charlotte sat in silence while Vincent reviewed the file again. Sunlight stretched across the office floor. Outside, Manhattan moved through another ordinary day. People crossed streets. Taxis filled intersections. Life continued. Hers seemed suspended somewhere between two versions of reality. There has to be a mistake, she said quietly. Vincent looked up. Possibly. That is not convincing, because I am not convinced. His honesty hit harder than reassurance would have. Charlotte rubbed her forehead. Why would Daniel Mercer care about me? Vincent closed the folder. That is what we need to learn. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of conversations, reports, and information Charlotte never imagined hearing. Vincent's team continued reviewing records. Timelines emerged, patterns appeared, none of them made complete sense. Yet one detail stood out above everything else. Daniel Mercer had begun asking questions about Charlotte almost a week before the meeting on the 37th floor. A week. The realization left her speechless. That is impossible, she said. I had never even seen that floor before. Vincent nodded slowly, which means his interest began for a different reason. That thought unsettled Charlotte more than anything else, because if this was not connected to the meeting, then what had started it? By late afternoon, Rosa appeared carrying coffee and enough baked goods to feed an entire neighborhood. The atmosphere in the office softened immediately. She glanced between Vincent and Charlotte before setting the tray down. You both look terrible? Vincent sighed. Thank you, Rosa. That was not a compliment. Charlotte laughed despite her sound. Then she looked at Charlotte carefully. You should take a break. I cannot. Exactly why you need one. She pointed toward the coffee. Drink. Nobody argued with Rosa, not even Vincent. An hour later, another message arrived. This one changed everything. One of Vincent's analysts had located a financial report connected to Daniel Mercer. Hidden among dozens of corporate filings was a development project scheduled for approval later that year. A major community redevelopment initiative, schools, housing, public services, the kind of project that would affect thousands of families. Charlotte stared at the document spread across the desk. Then something clicked. Wait! Vincent looked at her. What? She pointed toward one of the names listed in the proposal. I know this address. His attention sharpened instantly. How? Because my company manages property records there. The room fell silent. Suddenly, dozens of disconnected pieces began fitting together. Vincent moved beside her. They reviewed the documents again, more carefully this time. Every page revealed another connection. Not to the meeting, not to Charlotte personally, to information. Information that passed through her department every day. Information she had access to without realizing its significance. Charlotte's pulse quickened. Daniel never wanted me because of what I saw. Vincent's eyes met hers. No, Charlotte finally understood. He thought I already knew something. For the first time since this began, the mystery made sense. Daniel Mercer had mistaken coincidence for knowledge. He believed Charlotte possessed information related to the redevelopment project, information connected to approvals, contracts, and competing interests. Then she had appeared outside a private meeting involving influential people. To someone already suspicious, that coincidence must have looked intentional. The misunderstanding had grown from there. Vincent leaned back slowly. Relief appeared in his expression for the first time in days. If we can prove that this ends. The possibility felt almost unreal. An ending. A return to normal. Charlotte had nearly forgotten what normal felt like. By evening, additional evidence confirmed the theory. Communication records, meeting schedules, internal reports. Every new detail pointed toward the same conclusion. Daniel Mercer had built an entire assumption around a misunderstanding. He believed Charlotte held information she had never possessed. The tension that had followed her since the elevator finally began to loosen. Not completely, but enough to breathe. As sunset painted the skyline gold, Charlotte and Vincent stood beside the office windows overlooking the city. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Vincent looked at her. "You can go home tomorrow." The words should have filled Charlotte with relief. Instead, something unexpected happened. Her chest tightened. Home, the thing she had wanted since this began. Yet standing there beside him, she realized how much had changed. Vincent noticed the hesitation immediately. Of course he did. He noticed everything. Charlotte. Yes. His voice softened. "You should have your life back." Charlotte looked out across the city lights beginning to appear beyond the glass, then back at him, and for the first time since the wrong elevator changed everything. She realized the hardest part might not be leaving danger behind, it might be leaving Vincent Marino behind. The strange thing about life is that the moments people expect to feel dramatic often arrive quietly. The next morning, sunlight filled the estate for the first time since Charlotte arrived. No storm, no emergency calls, no new security reports, just clear skies stretching over Manhattan. Daniel Mercer had been confronted with the evidence. The misunderstanding had unraveled faster than anyone expected. He had built an entire theory around incomplete information. Once the records were reviewed and the timelines verified, the truth became impossible to ignore. Charlotte had never possessed the information he believed she had. The questions stopped, the searches stopped, the concern that had followed her for days finally began to disappear. By noon, Charlotte was packing her bag in the same guest suite where she had spent the longest week of her life. Technically, it had only been a few days. Emotionally, it felt like a year. She folded the last sweater and stared out the window. The gardens below glowed beneath the afternoon sun. Somewhere in the distance, she heard Rosa arguing with a delivery driver who was probably losing the debate. The sound made Charlotte smile. A knock came at the door. She already knew who it was. Vincent stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They had become strangely good at silence. "Your car is ready," he said. Charlotte nodded. "Thank you." Another silence followed. "Charlotte." "Yes?" His eyes met hers. "I am glad you are safe." The simplicity of the words hit harder than any speech could have. Because Charlotte knew he meant them, every single one. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "I am glad too." They walked downstairs together. The house felt different now, familiar, which was exactly the problem. Leaving should have felt easy. Instead, every step felt heavier than the last. Rosa hugged Charlotte before she reached the front door. "Do not disappear. I will try not to." Rosa pointed a finger toward Vincent. "And you." "Yes, Rosa. Sleep occasionally." Vincent sighed. Apparently, this was a familiar conversation. Outside, the city sparkled beneath a perfect spring afternoon. Charlotte's suitcase waited beside the car. Everything was ready. Home. The thing she had wanted from the beginning. Yet she found herself turning back toward him one last time. Vincent stood beneath the entrance canopy, sunlight catching the edges of his dark hair. For the first time since meeting him, he looked uncertain. The realization startled Charlotte. Powerful people were not supposed to look uncertain. Then again, the real Vincent Marino had turned out to be very different from the man she imagined on the 37th floor. "This is goodbye then," she said softly. Something flickered in his expression. Brief, honest, if that is what you want. Charlotte's heartbeat quickened. There it was. The truth both of them had been avoiding. Not danger, not secrets, not misunderstandings. Just two people standing at a crossroads, neither expected to reach. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. Then she laughed quietly. "You know, for someone who notices everything, you can be remarkably slow sometimes." Genuine confusion crossed his face. "What does that mean?" Charlotte stepped closer, close enough to see surprise replace uncertainty. "It means I do not want this to be goodbye." For 1 second, the world seemed to stop. Then Vincent smiled. Not the small, controlled smile she had seen before. A real one. The kind that reached his eyes. The kind that transformed everything. 6 months later, Charlotte stood inside a newly opened community center, overlooking the Hudson River. Children filled the classrooms. Families toured the building. Volunteers organized supplies. The project had started as a set of blueprints on a table. Now it was real. Vincent stood beside her as community leaders and local partners moved through the lobby. They worked together now, not because of obligation, because they chose to. His foundation expanded educational programs across the city. Charlotte helped manage outreach initiatives and scholarship partnerships. Somewhere along the way, work became friendship. Friendship became something deeper, something neither of them wanted to lose. 1 year after Charlotte stepped onto the wrong elevator, Vincent asked her to meet him on a rooftop overlooking Manhattan. The city lights stretched endlessly beneath the evening sky. A soft breeze moved across the terrace. He handed her a small velvet box. Charlotte laughed before he even opened it. "You planned this. Of course you did." He smiled. Then his expression softened. "The first day we met, I closed a door because I thought I was protecting a situation." His voice grew quieter. "I never expected that meeting you would open every door that mattered." Tears filled Charlotte's eyes before she could stop them. Her answer arrived immediately. 3 years later, sunlight poured through the windows of another building. A larger one this time. The Marino Community Education Center. Children laughed somewhere down the hallway. Staff members prepared for an afternoon program. A little boy raced past Charlotte's office, carrying an art project he was extremely proud of. Vincent followed several steps behind him, pretending not to lose a race he was obviously losing. Charlotte watched them through the glass and smiled. Life had not become perfect. Real life never does, but it had become meaningful, peaceful, full. Sometimes Charlotte thought back to that elevator, to the wrong floor, to the choice that changed everything. People spent years searching for destiny as though it announced itself with certainty. Hers arrived disguised as a mistake, a wrong turn, a locked door, and in the end, the greatest surprise was not that fate found her, it was that love was waiting on the other side.